Great. I think we'll get started if we're all ready. And we're recording this session just so that you know, but feel free to use the chat as we go along. We've got a team here, Athan and Lindsay from the foundation, the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro, and Bret, Mazzei, who are joining me in hosting. And I just wanted to give you a little sense of why we put this together. So I head up an organization that some of you know called CoMetta. And CoMetta is really focused on fostering an inclusive and connected community. And once COVID hit, we did a poll because things were really disrupted. And we asked people, what is it that you want for the future for our community? And we heard back from 300 some people. And top on that list was this issue of inequality that people found was really pervasive. But another factor on the list was also about how do we create a healthy, vibrant economy. And so based on the data, we've organized some convenings. We did one perhaps a month or so ago that was at the Civil Rights Museum that really focused on inclusion, equity, equality, and unity. We had a number of grassroots organizations join us, as well as members of City Council. And this is the second topic that we're taking on really after that. That is this intersection of equity and equality and economy. And if we really look at the national landscape right now, I'm struck by how central that these two issues are. So looking at the data coming out of the elections, these were the top two issues really that people indicated that they voted on: the economy and the nature of racial inequality in this country. These were prominent issues. And when we look at the Biden administration, they've declared 4 critical priorities, and these are the top 2. Really restarting the economy. I mean, among the top 4, they declared 4, but certainly COVID, but the economy and racial equality. So it's a really important issue for our times. We are, as a country, on this long journey of figuring out how we can create a more inclusive, equitable system for all. But we also need to create economic thriving. So this panel discussion, which will be facilitated by Athan, is really going to help us understand pathways that we can create those brighter possibilities for everyone in our community. So with that, again, I welcome you all to this conversation. Feel free to use the chat as the panel is underway to post any questions. Bret Mazzei is going to monitor the chat. And then as we conclude the panels, we'll have a chance to bring some of those questions to our panelists. So feel free to use the chat as we go along. Otherwise, we invite, maybe if you're not one of the panelists, to keep yourself muted so that we can hear everyone. So over to you, Athan, to get us started.
Thank you, Lyndon. Good morning. Hope everyone can hear me fine. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us, and I want to take the time to acknowledge any veterans now, recognizing Veterans Day. Thank you for your service. And also, I'm glad to see that we're still able to join in the midst of a global pandemic to keep going forward. I am going to try to be as brief as I can because we have quite a list of capable panelists that we're just going to get right into this. And panelists, when you are talking, well, actually, I'll just ask you to raise your hand and acknowledge so people will be able to know who you are. Niketa, if you could just raise your hand, they'll see who you are. Justin, Outling, I think everybody knows Justin. Clyde, and then Danny Brown. Okay, great. So that's who we'll be hearing from. So instead of just doing the usual panelists, you know, what we do, have people introduce themselves, I've asked the panelists to incorporate who they are, and a good way for us to get into this discussion is to, as they acknowledge who they are, the question is to the panelists, I want to ask them to share with us their interest in today's topic based on the perspective or interest that they're representing today. I'll start off we'll start off with Clyde and then go with Danny. Also, Clyde and Danny are no relations that I'm aware of, but just distant cousins. So Clyde, you want to kick us off, and we'll follow with Danny, and then Justin, and then Niketa will clean us all up and make us all look good.
Sure, Athan. Thanks for the intro and thanks for having me on the panel today. Just a little background about myself and why I have a passion for a more equitable economy. My background, I have over 20 plus years in IT experience, working in the public and private sector. Over those years, a number of challenges I've seen is in reference to being an African American male. And when I look around the room, I don't see anyone that looks like me. In different capacities, I've served in different companies, large and small, being an engineer, from an architect to project management to managerial roles, leading different positions or different departments in an organization. What I started to see more often is there was limited opportunities for African American males or females to hold those positions. So a lot of times when I'm looking around trying to find someone that actually looks like me from a mentorship perspective, that was lacking. If I fast forward, uh, going through that, having that experience, I ventured out, partnered with a number of people in the IT field that look like I do, and started an organization called RTriad.com. RTriad is a cloud technology company. We focus on cloud technology, cybersecurity. What we're starting to notice, or what we're understanding about the new gig economy and technology, is that it's rapidly changing. And for me, trying to keep up with that pace of change is a challenge in this field. But I also want to bring that back to when I start looking at minority businesses, there's also a challenge in keeping up with the rate of change in reference to how laws are being written and not being in those conversations. So I'm really here today to talk and focus more around how do we create a framework that can start to enable minority businesses to excel during challenging times and good times. And I want to speak to it from the emphasis of, you think of the old cliche saying, give, someone a fish, right? They'll eat for a day, but if you teach them how to fish, they're sustainable over a long period of time. So today, my focus will be around how do we help sustain minority businesses over that long period of time where they actually can make an impact to the economy.
Thank you, Clyde. Danny.
Good morning, Athan. I certainly appreciate you putting this together. And Clyde stole some of my thunder, but I'm gonna get a little chatter in there. I come from a construction background. I've been in business here in Greensboro about 30 years. And so I kind of look at things a little bit different, even though we all have similar experiences. I look at basically, the community at large as a system. And when you look at systems, you got to look at how this system is going to be sustainable over a period of time. And what I look at is what policies our elected officials are putting out that will impact my business directly on a daily basis. One that I commended Mr. Outling on was his local preference policy that he pushed forward with city council, which gave minority contractors like myself a little bit of skin in the game, because we were often overlooked when a lot of contracts that came out that we could actually do went to outside companies. When I say outside companies, I mean outside of the county, outside of the state. And we are here, we're part of the economy. As a minority contractor, statistics have shown that minority contractors hire within the minority community. And what have I seen is that a lot of companies that come in, they take money out of the community versus putting money into the community. And so when Mr. Outling put that local preference piece in, you know, I was on board with it. I loved it. And, you know, it's that type of policy that I think that we need to really look at when we're electing officials is what are they really going to do for the community, not just the Black and brown community, but the community overall. And that's pretty much it. And I totally agree with what Clyde has said. And, you know, I don't want to draw out the introduction part here, but I'm going to shut it down for now and give someone else an opportunity.
Thank you. That's a great segue to Justin. You're up.
Good morning. It's great to see many of you who I already know, and great to meet others who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting. My name is Justin Outling. I'm a member of Greensboro City Council. I'm also an attorney at a relatively large law firm in North Carolina, where I'm a partner as well as the director of diversity and inclusion. Now, I care especially about the topic we're discussing today, because whether it's as a private practice attorney or as someone who serves you in this community, there are a lot of disparate outcomes that are attendant to whether someone is Black, whether someone is white, or whether they fall into some other artificial social structure that our country has constructed. And I care deeply about it for many different reasons. You know, one is it is toxic. These disparate outcomes hurt all of us. I know Clyde made reference to, you know, the analogy of teaching someone how to fish. In my view, even beyond the issue of helping someone learn so that they can sustain themselves and their families, this issue causes all of us to miss out, and it hurts our economy for all of us, whether you care about diversity, equity, and inclusion or not. And something that I think about is a perfect illustration of that is I think about Major League Baseball. So obviously there was a time in our country where Major League Baseball was essentially segregated by race, such that you had an entirely separate Negro league of Black players. At that time, Major League Baseball to the masses did not have some of the best players in the world. And that hurt Major League Baseball. And it's much the same way to now or today with our local economy, with our national economy. You have really talented people who don't have an opportunity to contribute and make all of us better, apparently because of their race. And so as a result, as Danny made reference, as an elected official, as someone who serves you, I've worked hard on really figuring out ways in which we can move the ball forward to have greater outcomes, greater equality in outcome, and really opportunity for persons across our community. And I think that I and hopefully others in leadership have begun to realize what I think is an irrefutable reality, in that we have to dig much deeper than looking at things at the 50,000 foot level. We have to focus at the 50-foot level. Because, you know, even now today, I know very few people who would refer to themselves as being prejudiced. I know very few people who would consider themselves to be a racist or a white supremacist, even if they say things that are categorically offensive, categorically prejudiced. And so I think there needs to be a greater focus in that connection. And that's what I've endeavored to do on the city council through things like local preference and otherwise. In addition to the kind of economic aspect of it, as I'm sure many of you will state or hopefully will agree, on a more fundamental level, you know, I just think that there are patent unfairnesses in the way that we have structured many things in our local community and otherwise, and it doesn't have to be that way, and we can do better. So those are some of the things I'm looking forward to discussing today.
Thank you. Niketa.
Good morning, everyone. I care about equitable economies, both personally and professionally. Professionally, I work for the Greensboro Chamber of Commerce as the Vice President of Leadership, Diversity, and Inclusion. And as a part of my role there, I work with Accelerate Greensboro, our minority business accelerator. Through that work, I have the privilege of working alongside some outstanding business owners who've, have decades upon decades of experience collectively in navigating, innumerable obstacles to them, even starting their business, maintaining their business, and achieving wealth through their business. And yet they do. And so I care about things being equitable, certainly for them, as it will only help to grow our economy overall. I also care personally because, I am a Black woman. And when you see statistics about the wealth gap, particularly, the fact that 10 times that white people have 10 times the wealth of Black people in this country, I am that statistic. It isn't just a statistic. This is the reality, and others that you see on this call today are that statistic. I have also a number of entrepreneurs in my family who have supported themselves and their family through entrepreneurship and are hoping to create wealth for their families through entrepreneurship. So it certainly matters to me. I have to echo what Justin said as well. I think these conversations are important because this impacts all of us. When you have any major group of citizens and consumers who are not only behind in ability to achieve wealth, but depending on what statistics you look at, we may also be decreasing in wealth. That impacts all of us. That impacts our whole economy. Our GDP suffers with the way that the economy is today, with the amount of inequity that persists. So this is very important to me for both personal and professional reasons. I think more conversations like this are necessary, but also conversations followed by very bold action toward equity. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thanks to our panelists for getting us started. And one thing I'd be remiss without sharing, and when we use these terms, equity, equality, racism, oftentimes we can get stymied by a lack of a clear definition. So just for today, I think, and as a moderator, I'm operating from equity as being defined as a state or quality or idea of being just, impartial, and fair. The concept of equity is synonymous with fairness and justice. It's helpful to think of equity as not simply a desired state of affairs or a lofty value. To be achieved and sustained, equity needs to be thought of as a structural and systemic concept. So with that frame, we kind of alluded to some of those things earlier, especially having Justin, I think you did it very, very eloquently about systems and what's going on. We also want to talk about and have this conversation be positive and hopeful and uplifting. So with that, with our panels, we actually have some folks who have been successful and have navigated despite the obstacles present before minority women business-owned businesses and enterprises. They have navigated successfully here in Greensboro. So I want to shift our conversation around maybe some successes and how people have navigated. Danny, I'm thinking starting with you in construction in your business, but also I know you've been a successful contractor and benefited from some of the local preferences, but other opportunities. Could you, when we were talking in our prep call, you were talking about, for you, it's about providing options to how to advance and go to different levels, but levels where business owners are interested and want to go. Could you just share with us, what does that mean, like Justin said, on the 50-foot level for you as a Black business owner? Well,
sure. Well, with me, the way I look at it is, I've been here in Greensboro. I attended UNCG first. That's actually what brought me to Greensboro. And, my story is unique and different to me. And when I first came to Greensboro, and I said, what is it I want to do after college? I looked around. I seen the various opportunities, and I said, you know what? I came from a small town. Greensboro is not too far from where I grew up. And where I came from, it was one or two choices. Either you were going to farm or you were going to work in one of the local plants. And I said, well, the opportunities here are a little bit greater than where I came from. So I decided, I made a conscious decision to stay here in Greensboro and give it a shot. And so I got into business. It was kind of rocky at first because by me being here and being away from my family members, I didn't have that mentor here on the ground that I could go and talk to, somebody that I could kind of, have that intimate conversation with versus, picking up the phone call, calling my dad or calling my cousin or my grandmother. All of those people, like Niketa said, were business people in my family. So I did my college internship at the Small Business Center, and that was where I got the spark. I don't know if a lot of people remember, but the Small Business Center used to be located off of Yanceyville Street at the Revolution Mills. But by getting into business and being able to look at the obstacles that were in my way and leaning on the Minority Business and Women's office that was created by the city of Greensboro, I made relationships. And with those relationships, I kind of, in a way, created my mentor, because by going and visiting people, talking to them, and they were, the office would introduce me to other people that were in business. And I met Carl Robertson with R&R Transportation at the beginning of my business. And Carl, in a sort of kind of his unique way, took me in this wing and said, listen, don't be the angry black guy, because things aren't always going to go your way. And so I took that to heart, because I was like running into, just roadblock after roadblock, trying to get a contract, trying to get funding, the basic stuff. And when Carl said, listen, let's sit down, put a course of action and a plan together and make you successful. And what I did was took his advice. I did exactly what he said. I got a banking relationship started. And out of that banking relationship, I was able to secure my first city contract. With that city contract that I secured, I used that leverage to get a federal contract. I used that leverage to get another federal contract. And lo and behold, I ended up in, of all places, Louisiana, working on a FEMA contract. And that within itself was a real out. And I thought things were hard here in Greensboro. When you cross that Mason-Dixon line, it's a completely different ball game. And so I said, okay, you can do this. I found a local guy. He was a guy, a Caucasian guy. I'll never forget him. His name was Wes Early. He said, listen, brother, he said, I know you here to help us out. And what you're going to run into is you're not a local. And I was like, well, what does a local have to do with this? I'm here to help. And so he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to some people that's going to pave the way for you. And I went to the meeting. It was held at a local church. And this guy introduced me. He said, listen, this guy here is here not only to help the white community, but he's here to help the black community. I was doing a FEMA contract, doing Hurricane Katrina. And that relationship kept me in Louisiana for 2 years. And so I came back to Greensboro and I said, you know what? I'm going to use my experience here and start talking to people that I normally wouldn't talk to. At first, it was hard because I've been gone for 2 years and people were like, well, who is this guy? He's coming. He's got these bright ideas, but nobody knows him. I'm talking black community and white community. And so I had to bridge that gap with the black community that I knew very well. I had to go talk to some people in order to introduce myself to some of the white business owners here in town. And Jim Melvin was the mayor prior to that. Then I came back and he was, working, I think, the Bryan Foundation. And I spoke with Mr. Melvin because I had did some work with him. He said, well, you know, Brother Brown, we'll sit you down and we'll get you going. And to make a long story short, the roadblocks that were there weren't there intentionally. They were put there because of the systems that were put in place. And I had to learn how to work the system in order to get around the roadblocks. And with that, you know, we arrived at where we are today. And I look at my community and I was looking at the sheet about, you know, what people thought was the most important thing about this election. You know, some people looked at the economy, some people looked at the virus, you know, some people put their interest, you know, in the educational piece, which was part of the ballot. And with me, I looked at all of them. All of them are super important to me, especially to me, since I employ people out of the Black and brown community. I have some people out of the other communities as well, but I typically look to employ people out of the Black and brown community intentionally because just like myself being overlooked, they are getting overlooked. So with that, it's one of those things to where how can we, without rewriting policy or anything, how can we include this community that's been overlooked so long? And they say that, you know, well, there's no hope. Why should we vote or do anything to help, you know, the educational bond? And you have to go out and try to convince people. And I'm like, well, you know, the thing that we got to look at is we all either gonna grow together or we all gonna perish together. So we need to find that common ground, level the playing field. In order to do that, we have to, you know, like with me, for instance, I didn't think I had any racial bias. I really didn't. And, you know, and I thought about it. I was like, well, you know, I don't go around saying racist remarks. I don't, you know, look at people as being racist or anything like that. And I thought about it. I stay in a mixed community. And my wife and I, we adopted, you know, 2 little boys. And I thought about it. And I said, well, Danny, you have white neighbors and you have Black neighbors and you get along real well with them. But when is the last time that you had an in-depth conversation with your white neighbor about what's going on in the community, race relations, school bonds, anything like that? And like I said, I have 1 white neighbor, a Hispanic neighbor, 2 Black neighbors. I know everybody that's in my immediate circle of my house. And I looked at, I said, well, you know, I spend more time with the Black and brown folk than I do the white folk or the Hispanic people. And so I had to look at me, the guy in the mirror, and say, if I'm gonna make some change in my immediate community, I have to make the change with me first. And so we started engaging in conversations, and lo and behold, we got more in common than I thought we did. I'm talking the Hispanic guy and my white neighbor. But if we wouldn't have started the conversation, or I made that conscious decision to say, well, this is something that I want to do to engage with my neighbors, we wouldn't have had the conversation. And so I think that's where it has to start. It has to start with you first, and then it works from you to the next person. And you know, I don't want to start rambling or anything like that, because this topic is true and dear to me. And Niketa and I, we talk every day, and I can get into this thing a little bit deeper, but I want to kind of
Save some.
Yes, sir.
Save some.
Well,
I got you. We're coming back to you. We're coming back.
Okay, thank you, sir. I know we're on the time.
Yeah, and I tell you, this is for all y'all. It's hard moderating these things through Zoom because you can't give people the body cues, you know. But we're coming back to you, Danny, with that magic wand question. This is a good segue, though, to you, Niketa, because Danny talked a lot about navigating the systems and things, but also relationships. So, Niketa, if you could talk to kind of, you know, identify what's the most important component in your role, but also with the chamber that helps business owners like Clyde and Danny What do you think is the most important component that you all do that puts people on this path towards success?
Well, for one, I mean, and I hate to make it sound super simple, but that we are engaged in doing something toward positive change. But we are our goal is to be more economically inclusive, and so we understand that there are a number of disparities, and maybe through an entity like the Chamber of Commerce, you can't address all of them, but we understand that there are a number of disparities, including lack of access. And so while we are not a capital organization, we know that providing access to opportunities to earn capital is important. So through the Minority Business Accelerator, that's kind of our main goal, is to make Greensboro a #1 destination for minority-owned businesses, but doing that by focusing on our minority-owned businesses and helping them to scale and grow. So we work with a cohort right now of about 11 businesses who've already, like I said, had decades of experience collectively and individually. They have a number of years of experience. They've already achieved growth, but they, like Danny alluded to, there are a number of roadblocks, including just lack of access to those relationships. So we at the Chamber of Commerce, obviously, we're a convener of businesses of all sizes. And so we have minority-owned businesses that haven't historically had access or haven't been utilized by larger corporations. Then we, through the accelerator, are providing those connections to those business owners, to both the supply and demand side. We get to bring those two things together. Mm-hmm. So I think it provides at least, those introductions provide opportunity for us to kind of pick away at what we all have, the implicit biases that we all have. We are more likely to do business with the people that we know. And like Danny said, we usually do, since middle school, all of us started sitting with people that look like us and talking to people that look like us. And we've continued that into our adult years. So we feel more trust towards people that we know. We assign more rewards to people that we know, and that impacts our businesses. So by creating opportunity for our minority-owned businesses to build relationships with these companies that they might not have access to, it really does pick away at those biases. Somebody can meet Danny and understand that he is an incredibly smart guy and he knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And it challenges them to think differently. We also provide other tools and support as well, though. Mm-hmm. So we have a new program called Scale to Excel that will provide education, resources, mentoring, and coaching to help businesses to get to that next level as well. But I think both of those things are important, both the resources as well as the network.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna get to you, Clyde, next. Justin, be ready. I'm coming to you. We've got to save you, Les, because you're Justin. But Clyde, we've heard Danny and Niketa talk about access, mentoring, access to networks, or just access generally, access to capital. One of the things that you said in preparation prior to this, I thought was very helpful, was that you said, access to the capital beyond that 10,000 isn't what's gonna make you be sustainable or successful for the long term. You talked more about access to networks, and also you talked about mentoring. Can you tell us what about that? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, great question. When I think about what businesses are facing, I look at us going through this process in COVID, the pandemic. And I think what happened was during the pandemic, you saw a lot of businesses suffering. Minority business probably suffered the most. What government was able to do was rally together and inject funds into the economy, right? To help those businesses that were struggling and get back on track, to keep people employed and sustain a short period of time. I think what you start to see is that injection of funds sometimes doesn't allow us to really seek out the fundamental backbone of our businesses and how do we prop up these minority businesses. And what I mean by that, right? When I think about minority business as opposed to our counterparts, right? White America and the businesses, the enterprise businesses, there's a level of knowledge, there's this network, right, that happens that you don't see occur in our minority businesses. So when we're looking at, businesses looking for funding and trying to, get that $10,000 or $50,000, a lot of times what happens is we're not really understanding, those businesses are not understanding what it takes to be sustainable. We really just understand what it takes to start that business. So let me dig a little deeper. In our business, we just stood up one of two cybersecurity apprentice programs here in Greensboro. If you guys know, with the pandemic, everyone has kind of been pushed to the cloud. So we're a cloud technology company in cybersecurity. With our apprentice, we have 5 apprentices. And one of the things that we fostered into our learning is we use what's considered, not the traditional learning in your higher education, but we use more of what you would consider the flipped classroom, right? But we build that around mentor and coaching, right? So how do we help our apprentice shortcut the distance of where they're trying to go with mentoring coaches? Meaning, for me, it took me 20 years to get here, and I'm still bumping my head on different challenges that I may be facing. That's the same thing that's happening with our minority businesses is they take this long road and they still struggle, even though we're injecting funds into their business. So how do we start to build a framework around those businesses of where they have access to, city council, they have access to these large law firms from a legal perspective, right? What does it mean if I'm struggling as a business financially and I don't know a banker that I can call for support, right? Where I just have a bank account and I'm writing a check, right? I really don't have that relationship or the understanding of how to leverage those funds or how to use the resources that are afforded to the community. We talk about, businesses in the community, and Jason, thank you for, writing in place, keeping business local, because that's important. But what happens a lot of times is the minority business is not looked at as big enough to be a part of that effort, right? So that's where if we start to write incentives into the partnerships with the bigger companies where the smaller minority businesses can actually have an opportunity to have just a portion of that business, right? What they can start to do is learn. And now those incentives to the larger businesses that governments are giving back will actually start to foster a knowledge pathway to those smaller businesses. Mm-hmm. Now they can see the contracts. Now they can understand what it takes at the next level because there's a relationship that's been built with that larger organization. So back to the relationships. So if I can quickly help a small business fail quickly and recover, right, by working with a larger business, they learn from that. So now the learning process coupled with the financial piece makes them a more sustainable business. And that's kind of what we inject into our apprentice is how do we help them fail quickly and recover? Mm-hmm. Right? Because it's about the recovery process. The faster we know you're going to fail, but we want to help you get there, right? Not be scared to venture out, fail quickly, and we show you how to recover through standard processes and procedure and having that mentoring coach. You can do that in business as well. There are larger organizations, there's law firms or whatever. And if we can be intentional about creating that framework to create the success with our minority business, I think that network that's put together is going to help the success going forward.
Okay. So, it's a very powerful statement that you made that we don't often think about. It's okay to help these businesses fail, but really probably when we're talking about equity, the equitable part is helping them recover and get back and being intentional about that. Is that okay?
That's exactly it. It's helping them figure out how to recover a lot quicker, right? We know they're going to fail, right? And I think that's what we find is we're not giving them the opportunity because we're like, we don't think they can do it or they're going to fail. If we can help them fail quicker, right, and recover, right, through that recovery process, they start to learn and adapt, and they start to be able to change and be sustainable.
Okay. So Justin, you have the great task of what everybody wants to know. We've talked about what I'd say some of the soft pieces, the intangibles of the systemic pieces of not having access to the relationships. But we've also discussed that we can do all that, but sometimes there's still these structural impediments that from the institutions of government or legal, but also something you said in our prep call, even culturally, the impediments. You want to speak to those in relationship to what we just heard from the others?
I'd be happy to. You know, one of the things that I get frequently from people in the community, I certainly empathize with it myself, is something seems wrong. Why does it continue to exist year after year after year? I think part of that reason culturally is oftentimes we dial in at the wrong level, or at least not the best level, and we really need to look at things more closely. So for example, you know, Danny discussed essentially economics and supporting Black businesses. Oftentimes we'll have our discussion, we talk to a council member, our advocacy will be at the level of, I want you to support equity in businesses. What we don't have is a discussion that says, what's your plan for getting there, or what's your vision for getting there? What's your prioritization? What type of social or hard capital are you willing to expend to accomplish that goal? Because I will tell you, in my experience, everyone agrees at that really high level that we should support businesses and be equitable. Where people disagree is all of the levels beneath that at which change actually occurs. By way of example, Danny mentioned a local preference policy that we enacted to give local businesses a fair shot at contracts that could be life-changing for individuals in our community. Everyone, I think, now recognizes that that's been a really terrific thing, really beneficial for local businesses generally, and especially Black businesses. At the time, it was relatively controversial in our community, including with the Black community. And I would say that that's in part because of the level at which the issue was being analyzed, as opposed to digging down into the details and saying, well, yes, this is going to be changed. It threatens the status quo, but we know that a disproportionate amount of local businesses and smaller businesses that would benefit from this policy are Black businesses. This is something that's good for specifically the Black community. The level of discussion for many people didn't come down to that lower level. And as a result, it was a lot harder to get done. Moreover, just as a political reality, the program was scaled back so that it essentially would pass the city council. So while it was a terrific thing, it was a wonderful thing, it's something about which I'm very proud, because others had tried to do the same thing for many, many years in the city. The level at which you're looking at these issues, it has a great impact on whether or not something happens at all, moreover, the actual scale at which it happens. Additionally, I will say, culturally, I think oftentimes as a community, we have this thought that, you know, there are elected officials, there are people who we consider to be the top at their business organizations. Those are the people who create change. In my view, the reality is all of us have to be willing to get some skin in the game, use our social capital, our hard capital to help make things happen. It's a reality that the amount of capital and influence we have differs, but all of us can help increase the likelihood that we actually get changes that we want to see in our community. Because as a practical reality, anytime you change something, there is going to be someone who feels like they are detrimentally affected. And those people will advocate very hard for the status quo. And so if you have an absence of other voices pushing for change at the 50-foot level, as opposed to the 50,000-foot level, if you have an absence of those voices pushing for that change, those persons spending their social capital, it makes it very unlikely that there's going to be the progress that we want to see in our communities, or at least the progress at the speed at which we need it. So, those are some of the cultural impediments that I see. But I will say I've become more and more optimistic over the course of the past 8-9 months, especially because I feel like some of those things are really starting to change in a way that's going to benefit the entirety of our community, including the Black community.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It's good. We still have last question, Clyde. I'll come to you soon. Just make a note, giving Bret the heads up that we will get what I'm starting to use, Justin, get to the 50-foot level by taking in some questions from, I think, the audience. This is what I would say is the 50-foot level. Before we move on to that, Clyde, I saw you had your hand up, and
I just wanted to comment to kind of some of what Justin was speaking to, and it's more around, I always ask myself, and looking at my business, why am I looked at as a Black business? And why am I not looked at as a business? Speaking on RTriad, we're one of 2 cybersecurity companies in the state and one of 15 in the country. Cybersecurity is probably on the forefront of every company's mind at this time. So why is it such a challenge that, getting access to partnerships, getting access to funds or whatever, why is that an issue? Right? When we know it's needed, we know it's, out in front. So why am I looked at as a Black business as opposed to a business that's making a change for other organizations in my community, right? Building relationships. Our biggest challenge is just building a relationship. We're training individuals and we're looking for people to hire those individuals. So we're shaping and molding them for the gig economy, cybersecurity, cloud technology. Our challenge is really finding organizations. They've been looking for these experts and couldn't find them. Our question is, let us help you build that talent.
complicated answer, complicated response to a complex situation. But it leads me to this question. You kind of delved into it before we close out this portion with the panelists and open it up. Danny, Niketa, and Justin, I'll start and just put it out here, and you all can respond. If giving you the magic wand, I'm the wizard, and I'm going to pass it off to you all. What would you do, or what needs to happen to advance equity and have a healthy economy for Greensboro? Oh, I'm sorry, I should pick out.
Well, I'd be happy to start. Building on what I said a moment ago, the general public pay a little bit closer attention and pick up the phone or send an email to someone who you think can help bring about change. One of the most encouraging things that I've seen in the past 8 months, and some of it is by persons who are on this call, they have actually contacted me on particular issues and said, even on racial related issues, and these are persons who are white, and says, what's your position on this? Here's mine. And explain to me why you may have a different position. I think that that's great. Ultimately, you may not agree on everything, but I think that type of engagement and advocacy tremendously increases the likelihood that we have advancements in racial equity, economic and otherwise. And so, my magic wand would be for people to dial in a lot more closely than they have been, because I think it really has a tremendous potential to increase the likelihood that we actually get equity throughout our community.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Niketa, Danny, can you do it within 2 minutes to allot for participation?
Yeah, I would say focusing on parity as much as we are on inclusion, just from a very broad perspective. We do have a system of advantage and a system of bias within this country, and we can't necessarily policy our way out of that current system. But what we can do is we can ask for courageous leadership from our government officials. And we're just on the heels of, or just come out of rather, an election, and it is an important duty that we vote. But our duty as citizens goes beyond just voting. That's not where it ends. We have to remember that when we elect people, they work for us. They serve at the pleasure of the community, and so we need to make sure that we are asking for that courageous leadership from them. I think Justin mentioned this. The status quo is done. Like, it will never fix this situation. We have to be innovative. And I would say more specifically, setting bold goals as it relates to procurement and supplier diversity at the government level. And I mean, for example, if for example, 97% of contracts went to non-minority owned businesses, then parity isn't then saying we're going to set a goal of, of maybe doing business with 10%. Like, you have to be much more bold in your goals in that way. I would also say, and this completely is my view, that maybe considering incentivizing programs that are achieving measurable parity goals. We fund incentives to large corporations to bring their companies here, because we see value in the impact that they'll have in our community. But we have businesses in our community that have value as well. And if we put our funds in incentivizing them to grow, we'd be further along in terms of an equitable economy. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, you will have the final say on that.
Yes, sir. Well, I look at it a little bit different. I agree with Niketa and Justin. What I look at, since I'm in the contracting arena, I believe in the incentives as well. But I think the way I look at it is, I look at the city government and I look at the department heads and how they have to run their departments. And I think as a city council, I think the city council needs to start to look at the department heads and say, okay, there's an incentive if you reach this goal. If you don't get this goal, then it needs to be something that's tied to your evaluation for your review. With the NWBE office, for instance, my personal opinion is, in order for the MWBE office to have the legs and the support that it needs to do what it was designed to do, that department, rather than reporting to an assistant in a department, it needs to report directly to city council. And then that way it has the leverage to do what it was designed to do. Without that structure, you got a department, but it's like Obama was in his last term. He was the president, but he didn't have the power. So, we have to look at what we put in place and how we put it in place in order, to make life better for all people, just not some people. And, when this thing happened with these checks started getting put out, I'm like, look at the $20 million checks that were sent back. What if you took that $20 million and say, okay, we're going to take this same $20 million and we're going to give it to some local government and let the local government disperse this across the board on an even playing field. That's how you inject change and then create jobs, you create wealth, and you get people back working. Put it in the hands of the people. Sometimes we make stuff too complicated. And, but I don't want to take up too much time. I know we want to get some questions in, but I think if we look at how we incentivize some of these systems, I think that we can look at doing a little bit better job.
Well, thank you for getting us started and as we transition. But before we transition, I want to take podium privilege as we're talking about equity and looking at these things and courageous leadership. Part of why I'm here and the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro is involved in this is that we are really starting to look at up and down through all of our operations, internally and externally, about how we address equity and approach things with a racial equity lens. And one of the big things that we're all excited about that is relevant for this is the Big Equity Fund. That's Black Investments in Greensboro Equity Fund. The Big Equity Fund that we like to talk about in full disclosure, Danny is one of our leading this effort as part of the steering committee and a part of the visionary donors for this. And some of you have supported this effort, but it's really trying to look at the role that philanthropy can play, but more importantly, how Black community, along with allies, can start looking at some of the disparities and looking at different areas. Everybody's asking us, what are you going to do immediately? Well, first, we're going to get our 3 million raised before we do anything. So anybody feel free to contact me after that. Lyndon said I could say that since I would agree to moderate. But really, there's momentum in the leadership building off what Justin and others have done. But as a community, we can start anywhere when we're talking about these disparities in equity. But I'm excited for Greensboro because our community foundation is engaged in leading this effort. And we think the Big Equity Fund is going to have a long lasting and enduring impact on these issues. So love to hear from anybody. Contact me about the Equity Fund. So with that gave me a little bit of more time for Bret. Because thank God you're here because all this chat activity was I can't keep up with it. So Bret, if you raise your hand so people can see you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Athan. Thank you for those that have been typing in questions. We have about 15 to 20 minutes. We'll get to a few of them. We probably won't get to them all, but also please continue to write in the comments things you're learning, things you thought you have, and we'll read some of those out after we get through the Q&A session. So the first question that was sent in, I think relates somewhat what Danny just talked about, and really what everyone's talked about, is how do we know if Greensboro is improving? How do we know if we're getting better or getting worse? What are your thoughts around that? Any of the panelists want to take a shot? Us as residents, how do we know if we're doing better?
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously two ways in which you can measure it, at least at the broadest level. So that's qualitative, like what do you see and what do you feel? The other is actually quantitative. For example, measuring and analyzing the degree to which we have more jobs than say we had 4 years ago, the degree to which those jobs pay more, and who's on the receiving end of any additional jobs or increased pay. I would say qualitatively, we as a community and individuals, we do that all of the time. Like we'll go downtown and we'll look at, X project or Y baseball stadium. What we do less of a good job doing, at least as a city organization, is actually analyzing things quantitatively. My hope is that we get there, but that's where, candidly, I think different people come to issues in different ways. And for some people, the quantitative is not nearly as important or drives their decision-making process or their strategy, notwithstanding, the fact that that might be the best approach generally. By way of example, because it relates specifically to this topic, at a recent Greensboro City Council work session, we were having a discussion about the city contracting with minority and women business enterprises. And we were presented with wonderful statistics that said X percentage this year, Y percentage during this later period. As you start to ask questions about, well, we changed the metric between those two periods, what are the apples to apples comparisons so we know whether or not there's been real change for businesses in our community or simply change that appears because we changed the metric, we were in a place where we couldn't get an answer to that question. Obviously, if you're really concerned about seeing transformational change or change you need in a community, you at least need to understand what you're measuring. Moreover, you want leadership that's really focused on that on a continuous basis. And so, my hope is that over time we get more towards the quantitative measuring of outcomes in addition to, the qualitative measurement, which I think all of us do all the time. And that's what we certainly hear most of when we hear about the great things happening downtown and elsewhere. But I will say, the reality is qualitative, in my view, can be very deceiving and very dependent upon where you happen to go, where you happen to live. It doesn't really give you as full of a picture.
Thanks, Justin. Anyone else? Otherwise, we'll jump to the next question. All right. So we have on this panel foundations, government employees, business owners, chamber members. Throughout Greensboro, there are many organizations working towards equity. How do you see these groups working together to increase effectiveness, and is that synergy required?
I definitely think that synergy is required. I think that's a part of the challenge as well. If I could, add that to my magic wand question, that better collaboration, I think is important. Oftentimes people think of a Chamber of Commerce as a city entity, and it's not. We're a private nonprofit. But we do need to work closely with the city of Greensboro, with Guilford County, specifically as it relates to minority-owned businesses. But in terms of economic development in general, we definitely need to have a really close relationship with them. And realistically, municipalities do, like the city of Greensboro does, and can drive economic change. But we also, as a chamber, we also need to be very in close partnership with organizations like the United Way, who are doing a lot of work to mitigate poverty in our community and have, a beat on what's happening in the nonprofit community. There are ways that I think we can connect with universities as well. I mentioned earlier that we have a new program to work with, specifically with minority-owned businesses. And that means that we need to make sure that we engage. In order for that program to be successful, we'll have to engage business owners, major corporations, all of our universities here, as well as other organizations like Piedmont Business Capital, East Greensboro Now. So especially as it relates to building an equitable economy, there definitely collaboration is absolutely necessary.
Can I just add from that too? I think everyone I like to look at it as a table with multiple legs, and we all come to the table and we help prop up that table with our leg. The thing I know is philanthropy. And one of the things I think that we're doing at the Community Foundation is, yes, we facilitate different things, but more importantly, I think more important than the dollars and what we're doing with Big Equity Fund and some other work through expanded community giving, one of the committee members said something with me, and I hearken with this and resonates well, is that we got to try to create a norm, a cultural norm in Greensboro that equity is good. It's okay. It's not a bad thing. And if anybody who's not, like on board, I think, Justin, like you said, everybody is at the 50,000 level is good with that. But when it gets down to the core, we also have to be comfortable and say that this is what we do. We're not afraid of it. But also the data in other places shows that places where equity is lifted up as a value, but also structurally things are put in place, those cities prosper. We just have to just all come together in our different parts, but make this the cultural norm that's for Greensboro.
Thanks, Athan. Niketa. There have been a few similar questions around how people on this call can really support this. I know Justin had mentioned already about getting involved in kind of detailed government work or whatever in terms of being engaged. I'll just read a few of these questions because they're a little bit different, but please answer them. One person asked, are there any good resources to identify and support Black-owned businesses? She had, sounds like, contacted various organizations and was having a hard time finding that list or knowing about them. Someone else asked, it looked like they had a family foundation and they were asking how they could support helping drive more equity in the community. So there's a couple, but there's more. Just in general, how do you see that this group that's on the phone now, that's not in the positions that you all are in, how can we support?
I think I'll jump in on this one. I think that the main thing that we could do to support minority businesses, one, if you're looking for a minority business that's already been vetted, I would say your best source would be the City of Greensboro Minority and Women's Business Enterprise, because all of those companies have been certified both by the city and by the state of North Carolina. Secondly, there's a McCants Communication. He publishes the Black pages here in Greensboro, and that publication also lists a lot of the minority and women-owned businesses within the Gifford County, Greensboro area. But I think, like everybody has alluded to, this platform that we're doing now is what we really need to have more synergy around. It's bringing people in the community together so we can put out there what it is that we're actually wanting our community to look like. Take the government out of it and make it a community issue. And then when we need to bring the government in, we take the community issue to our elected officials and say, this is what we want Greensboro to look like. And I think that is the start of it. The conversation, like what we're doing today, this Zoom call. We just need to have more platforms like this to where we can get out and meet people and get your opinions and your questions out and start to help with the healing process, because there is something wrong. We just hadn't figured out how to fix it. And I think this is the start, that we meet like this and we start engaging in the conversation.
Thanks, Danny. Athan, did you have something?
Well, yeah, the family foundation question is a philanthropy question. I think one, to that family foundation, keep doing what you're doing. But also we have to take a long-term approach to this, because if it's systemically has been created to do that, so therefore we have to have a systemic response that's just as long and enduring with it. And I think it takes an understanding to say, we want to partner with people. I'm coming back to Big Equity Fund. That's a big thing in my 25-year career in philanthropy, that I always saw that these conversations and the action got stymied because, the race question came up. And I would see too many times that, you'd have white donors who would go out and do things well. But I saw that it wasn't as effective, because ultimately what we're really talking about is power sharing. And if you don't have other donors of color who have the lived experience, but also even with their lived experience, may not even understand equity and how they got through it. Basically that's what I was hoping we do, and we are doing with the Big Equity Fund, is bringing together that opportunity for other folks to come down and say, when it gets down to it, we can have the hard conversations, but it's a different conversation when it's shared risk, shared investment, and we can plow through the race piece, but ultimately we can have honest conversations about power sharing. And to me, that's what it comes down to. So continue to be in partnership with others, but let's expand this narrative of who's a donor and who's capable to give, but also we got to rethink about how we do it, and with the goal being that we want to share power, but ultimately we want to make Greensboro better.
There are also, I wanted to mention that there are also organizations I mentioned before, PMA Business Capital, for example, that have loan and grant programs for minority-owned businesses. People are looking for a way to engage, certainly consider supporting those organizations, but also entrepreneurship incubators like ours, or accelerator programs like ours. There are multiple ways to get involved. Like I said, it might mean just learning more about the companies that we work with, all of whom are certified businesses. So reaching out to learn more about those businesses, but also engaging with our programming and content. It might be as a guest expert, it might be as a mentor or coach. So there are multiple ways to touch minority-owned businesses as well. But I would say consider supporting organizations who support those businesses.
Thanks, Niketa. We have time for one more question. Some we're not going to get to that are in the chat. I will just comment. There have been a bunch of comments around education, the importance of education in this conversation, whether it's post-secondary education or all the way down to elementary. The final question here is going to be kind of drag you a bit into the details. There have been a few comments and a few questions specific around kind of local policies and procedures, and where you see some of those policies, what hurts this, what makes this a harder battle to create this equity in our community, what prevents some of these businesses. Now, we've had some successful business owners here, Clyde, Danny, Niketa, Justin, all of you. So how are you able to overcome those, and what specific policies do you think we as a community need to focus on here over the X number of months?
Yeah, as someone who serves on Greensboro City Council, I will say it's around policies and structures that we have to support business and encourage more jobs and better paying jobs in our community. Now, going back to that, 50,000 foot, 50 foot comparison, everyone wants more jobs in our community and better paying jobs. Where the breakdown comes is that next level, and what does a policy implementation look like? By way of example, we recently had a situation in which a business was renovating a building. They were almost complete with the renovation, and they asked the city of Greensboro for $80,000 for an enhanced patio. Now, the city of Greensboro has very clear criteria around when it gives money to incentivize additional activity, when it gives money to create additional jobs. This additional money provided for this business owner to have a nicer patio, but the project was almost complete. It didn't contribute a single additional job. Moreover, it ran contrary to the existing policies that exist within the city of Greensboro. Now, where it takes on an equity lens is, I don't think anyone would have provided that incentive to that business owner simply because he was white. But the reality is, when you see exceptions to rules happen, as a general matter, you don't see them for the benefit of Black businesses and Black business owners. And so that's an area in which we can do better. So it's not only intentionally thinking about what are the policies that we're creating to support greater equity for Latinx businesses or Black businesses or women businesses, but on a case-by-case basis, are we consistently applying the policies the way that we should? And are we making exceptions on a fair and equitable basis? Because at the end of the day, What that $80,000 means is that business had a nicer patio, right? Great. It also means that that's $80,000 less for the city to spend on all of the other important things that need to get accomplished in our community, including supporting minority and women businesses. And if you have policies and structures that allow things like that, it makes it very hard to progress on scale. So yes, we might be able to increase, one Black businesses or one Latinx businesses, bottom line for a year. But if you don't have policies and structures in place, it's hard to do that on scale and really move the needle in the transformational way we need.
I guess, may I add to that just a bit?
Yeah, go ahead, Clyde. Thanks.
I guess for me, I'll say this, and maybe it'll be a shocker, but it shouldn't. I don't really know if you can say that a Black business, my business, or the next business beside me, is really successful, right? Take COVID, for example, right? So it's kind of the mentality of, well, if I can't sustain or weather the storm, is that success, right? Your bigger enterprise businesses, your other businesses, not business of color, they're sustaining that. Why? Right? They know something I don't know. So when you know African American as a friend or their organization or whatever, it's hard to look at them to say, are you successful or not? Because they always looking good, right? But at the end of the day, let the pandemic happen, and you can look at the statistics to show Black businesses were impacted more so than white businesses. So it goes back to, how do we embed that system as opposed to financially injecting the business, right? Not saying that we don't need that financial injection, but we need, and I'll get into it when we talk the magic wand question, I'll get into this a bit more, but we're looking at success as just existing. As a business, I'm looking for more than just existing. I'm looking to help reshape my community, individuals that look like me, my youth, so on and so forth.
Thanks, Clyde. You might have to wait on your next comment till our next session, but we'll what we're going to do now is thank you everyone for all the comments. I'm going to go through and read some of those out to the group, and then I'm going to pass it back over to Lyndon for conclusion. Jasmine writes, leadership is, in quotes, leadership is only as strong as the community it serves. Joel writes, give someone a fish and you feed them for a day, teach them to fish, and they can keep on feeding themselves, but only if they can afford to buy a fishing rod. Sometimes you have to provide a fishing rod as well. Please continue to type in your comments. And Jasmine again writes, mindset is critical to initiate change. Someone writes, equity also needs to encompass undoing the consequences of past racist policies. We go into a bunch of examples around redlining and home ownership. In concluding, we can work toward housing equity in affordable housing. Kevin writes, change of mindset begins with culture. We need to cultivate an environment non-hostile that allows us to get to right thinking. According to Dr. Stephen Covey, dependence leads to independence, which leads to interdependence. A bunch of people write about access to capital. Access to capital and networks and community are really important to success. Anthony talks about, we have 81 Title I schools in Guilford County. How do we address post-secondary education innovatively in poor communities? UB writes, how are we including other minority groups, Latinx, Asian, et cetera, into these conversations, especially small business owners? Jasmine writes earlier, we prime our youth in a quality manner. The better we provide solid talent pipeline for a progressive, innovative, and thriving community. Jasmine again writes, what's the probability of having agile task forces to facilitate agile action and results? With all the knowledge and database we have in the city, we are already empowered to take action sooner than normal. So thank you everyone who's been writing comments in. Lyndon, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Bret. So recognize that we're just got a few minutes left, but we've had a really wonderful conversation. And what we're going to do is put together a report that contains some of the key insights that emerged from the conversations today and push that back out. Clearly, we all listen from different lenses. And for me, what really stands out is the importance not only of structures and systems and access to capital, but the networks, the soft stuff, the mentoring, helping businesses succeed. And we all have a role to play in this regard in what we can do by opening up our own social capital and making these connections. I know there are many people who are on this webinar, on this panel discussion, who've been actively involved in the community to build networks, build capabilities that this enables. And I just want to maybe take a minute to call out Joe Landau, who's been involved in the co-op movement that's been working on this front for decades in the community. And Joel, do you have maybe just a couple of short comments that you'd ask as you've been listening in?
Oh, there's so many comments, but I'll try to keep it. You mentioned the co-op aspect, so I'll just talk about Deep Roots for a second, that I managed for 18 years, and I've been president of the board of directors the last few years. And so like many co-ops, Deep Roots is open to anyone in the community. It's community owned, so it's a way to get community involvement in a business, and it's locally owned, so any profits get recycled locally, which is better for the economy. And it does a couple of things that other businesses might do, like we put an emphasis on purchasing from local vendors. So a good part of our business is directly supporting the local economy. We make a meeting space available for any group in the city to use. Of course, not right now because of COVID, but generally that's open to anyone. And it's a way of fostering community and helping people network and make connections. And we go by the triple bottom line, which, like there are other businesses too that aren't focused solely on how much money they can make. Of course, you have to make money to stay in business, but we're just as concerned with the impact we have on the community and on the planet, the environment. So there's educational work that goes into promoting healthy eating habits and teaching people about where the food comes from and how it's grown. So that's just some thoughts about that.
Great, thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Joe. Were you going to say something more?
Well, I was going to say one other quick thing with the city. I think there are a lot of people who work for the city are dedicated people, but just structurally you have silos. It's just each department kind of operates unto itself, and a lot of businesses work that way too, big businesses. But so a lot of programs really need more interconnection between different departments, and maybe that's something that Justin's been working on. I don't know, it's a hard nut to crack, how to get these different departments working together to better serve the overall community.
Great, thank you, Joel. Important points, and appreciate all the work that you've been doing in the community here. I know, Clyde, we have a couple of minutes left, but we perhaps missed you with the magic wand question. So could I come back to you and say, what's the magic wand you'd wave to make things better, to create change here?
Yeah, so for me, the magic wand, I think it kind of looks like this in short. If we all are in agreement that we know we have a problem, yeah, the next thing is knowing what the problem is. Do we really agree that we understand what the problem is? When I think about minority businesses, I go back to our sure existence here in the United States, right? For me, African Americans brought over against their will, they were injected into a system that did not work for them, right? We're still in that same system. So if we can agree to that we're in a system that does not work for African Americans, right? What do we do, right? It's not funding, it's not this, it's not that, it's how do we build a system that starts to improve that, right? So, it comes to building a sustainable framework that supports our minority businesses. What does that really look like, right? To me, that is building a financial lifeline that supports the growth of opportunities for minority businesses, right? And we have to be intentional about that financial giving and support and what all that means from a financial perspective. It also means developing partnerships with businesses. What I talked about earlier is how do we start to build that mentoring partnership with your enterprises. You take your bigger 20,000 plus companies that are here in the community. How do we help and make it intentional for them to support some of our minority businesses through coaching and mentoring and development around how to sustain a business, right? How do we bridge that knowledge gap and actually help that business grow? And then I think the last piece of that is really that system needs to foster some type of measuring mechanism that looks and monitors all those key indicators on a very frequent basis. So when that business does fail or come up short, we help them recover real quickly and get back on track and learn from that process. So if I had the magic wand, it would be building a system, right? Not, transactional type of stuff to help minority business, but actually really be intentional about what that system looks like and how it works for minority businesses. And it starts at the local governmental level and how we start to build that. And we have to be intentional with those funds and how we start to release them to the different businesses.
Great. Thank you, Clyde. And thank you to you and all the panelists who joined us today. Thank you, Athan, for facilitating a robust discussion, and Bret for helping monitor the chat and offer back questions and putting together this event today. From the CoMetta perspective, as I mentioned, what we're about is really trying to bring people together, what Danny talked about, to enable conversations, enable connections. That seems to be a really critical element when it comes to equity. So as I say, we'll be putting out a report, but we'll be also hosting a couple of other convenings that relate to important issues in the community related to green spaces and the environment and sustainability, and also related to the arts. I think the long journey for the community, and I think this is something that all panelists alluded to, it's not simply what city government can do, or it's not simply about policy, it's about what we all can do together to step up. And clearly there is a very strong intention in this community, as Clyde was saying, to create change, to create a better society for all of us today, and we have a role to play. So thank you for showing up, and thank you for listening. Feel free to email me back. I'll put my email into the chat as well if you've got some additional thoughts on how we can continue this movement. But wish you all a good day ahead, and we'll continue to meet and connect and move this forward. So thanks again. Bye all.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Clyde.
Yep.
And thank you, Athan and Kevin, for the partnership and hosting this event. I think we had a good turnout and a really good conversation.